Senator Cynthia Lummis, who you all are familiar with, just posted a picture of herself with Scott Bessent, the incoming Treasury Secretary. And she said, Scott Bessent will be a champion for digital assets and a crucial ally in passing my strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now that this is public, I've been hearing some stuff about this for a while now. Here we go. And, you know, now that she's said it, like, I think we can talk about it a little more. Bessent is on board. Like, the U.S. Treasury Secretary is on board with the strategic Bitcoin reserve. And what's interesting about this post, Lummis's reserve is different than like an executive order reserve, right? Lummis's reserve is a bill that has to be passed, and that is buying like quite a bit of Bitcoin. So that's kind of a new data point in that, you know, if you just interpret off this post, that Bessent would not only support like the executive order style, which would be a smaller size, but actually would support the Lummis style, which goes up to 1 million coins.
To me, it's if the United States starts adding or buys a bunch of Bitcoin, because if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense to say we're going to DCA $1 billion a day or something like that to buy Bitcoin. It only makes strategic sense to come into the market and just rip it and say, we're going to buy 1 million Bitcoin and we're going to soak it all up. We don't care if it gets to $1 million, $2 million. We've got the money. We'll buy it. That's what the adding to the strategic reserve is what, you know, is going to tip us over into the suddenly, in my opinion.
100%. And so I'd actually even I'd want to kind of pick apart a couple of those things. There's also multiple different versions of the reserve. And you kind of were getting at that, but just, I would not say that the version where they buy Bitcoin is 60% priced in at all. Like if you're going to like
not at all, not even close. Yeah.
So much higher. Maybe the version where they keep the coins, the Silk Road coins, even that, it's like complicated. I think the market, despite the odds, has barely priced this thing in. I think there's like a vague optimism that like, yeah, it sounds like something good's happening. But my honest belief is if we get a real strategic reserve, this thing goes to 500. I really think that.
I don't think that Trump's going to have the Congress approval to do any big things next year. I just don't see it. There's a chance. But I feel like he's going to have to work really hard to get anything through Congress at this type of scale. And so I'd be bullish on whatever he can do from the executive branch. And I'd be pretty bearish on the Congress by end of the year.
I want to offer one thing here. And it actually comes from an astute listener, viewer of the show. This is a few weeks ago. He sent me an email to say we were having an interesting discussion about the strategic reserve. I think you could probably, like you said, Brady, this is going to be something we're going to talk about a lot. But he basically put it in comparison with gold. And what made me think of this again was what Dan Moorhead said. He was saying that the U.S. owns roughly, he said $600 billion, I think is the number, dollars worth of gold today. If the U.S. holds 200,000 Bitcoin, which I think is roughly what they hold at $100,000, that's $20 billion worth of Bitcoin. So the U.S. currently holds 30 times the amount of gold than they do Bitcoin. That's just one point of comparison to keep in mind there. But what the astute listener of the show had to say was if they try to get to a similar percentage ownership, and with gold, you always have to remember this is an estimate, right? But you assume it's close. If there's roughly 200,000 tons of gold, the U.S. claims to hold something like 8,000 tons, which is roughly 4%. And if the U.S. is going to say, hey, we want to have roughly 4% of Bitcoin reserves, again, these are just rough numbers, but it just like puts it into context. That means they would have to 4x their Bitcoin that they hold. So that would mean 800,000 Bitcoin to get to 4% the supply of Bitcoin.
I'm a kind of a true believer on their ability to pull this off. I think the executive order, I think we all agree that like the executive order exists for like a, $10 billion, $20 billion, something in that size. They can pull that off. That's higher probability. If they want to get the bill through, I really think they will. I mean, they do have leads in these, in the Senate and the House. They've got the Treasury on board. They've got supporters. There's a section of like pro Bitcoin and crypto Dems that like could probably be brought over.
Quite a few actually.
And I think a lot of these people have PTSD from watching all of their colleagues who opposed Bitcoin and crypto getting completely slaughtered in the election. And so what, are you really going to stick your neck out over, I don't know, we own some fucking asset from money we print? Like, I don't know. I think they can get it through.
I think that's a really strong point. They want to have a counter force to their major L. I also can picture the news media machine kicking up the Trump just wants to enrich the early Bitcoiners. He owns it. This is increasing the wealth divide. And I could see the Dems in Congress say something like, we support crypto, but we don't support enriching the early people and Bitcoin's bloodthirsty billionaire brigade.
It'll be a thing. Yeah. I mean, are we just enriching the, the early holders? Like that'll be a real thing. And it is on these advocates like us and them to communicate why this is actually good for the US. Matthew Pines has done the best work here. He's written literal dozens of pages of reports, both for these people and the public, talking about why there are geopolitical, financial, and strategic benefits to this that benefit all Americans in a very real way. But it is a thing we will have to talk about, that this isn't just like a money grab or a gift to the people that funded Trump's campaign. So that's real. That hurdle is real.
257 pro-crypto candidates were elected to the House, and the House has 435, I think, 435 voting members. So that's well over half of the House.
It's real.
Are pro-crypto candidates who are, I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, people talked about the red wave, but it was a crypto sweep. I mean, I have to say crypto here because a lot of the money came from crypto companies, but it was a crypto sweep. So it's a very strong signal that people want freedom to choose money.
And just to reiterate this point, what's interesting is not only all the pro people that got in, but all the anti people that got out. So it's like, for every 1 point you won, you actually won 2 points, because you not only got a pro in, you got an anti person out in many of these cases. And then it creates this psychological effect of the people that are on the fence. They're not really sure. They saw how slaughtered all the haters got. You're not going to do it. It's such a losing. I talked about this, like when the election happened, like they lost their entire political accord for nothing. There was never any upside from opposing this stuff. No one's going to vote for you because you hate Bitcoin or you hate crypto. You're not going to get anywhere. And you just lost your entire career because of it for no upside. And there's not going to be a bunch of people rushing to replicate that strategy.
A lot of what we're saying here is the probabilities of the most bullish case happening, which is they do say we're actively adding to this, the US government. But there's a great chart that Bitwise put out there, but it's based on the data that you could find at bitcointreasuries.net. And it just shows the Bitcoin holdings that we're aware of by government entity. And the US is the number one right now at just under 200,000. So the reason I think that's important to point out is I think it's massive, even if they just say we're holding this, that 200,000 Bitcoin, $20 billion, the wealthiest, most powerful nation in the world, only if they say, hey, we're holding this as a strategic asset, that's the number one government entity holder of Bitcoin. That alone sends a signal to everyone else to say, hey, you guys are below us in the list. We don't even have to add more Bitcoin. Like that alone is ridiculously bullish. And if you talk about them adding to it, that's just like another level.
You're right. Even just saying, the United States saying, hey, we've created this Bitcoin strategic reserve. We've got this 200,000 Bitcoins. We're going to put it in there and we're going to hold it. That's a signal. Okay. Russia. Okay. China. Okay. Go ahead.
I just looked up the chart you sent, John. US, China, UK, and it would be Germany. at 50,000
Ooh.
coins, but they liquidated them in the summer. So it feels
Yeah,
like
that's
we
right.
should have like a Twitter bot that once a month says how much Bitcoin Germany sold
Yeah,
and how much they would be
how much
up.
they've lost. Yeah.
It would be fourth in the world.
How much did they sell? Was it something insane, like
50,000.
50,000? Yeah.
Not to mention they blew up their entire economy, and like 300 to 400-year-old companies went bankrupt in the last 2 years.
Yikes.
Can you imagine fumbling the bag that hard?
It's yeah, they've
Okay.
really been off sides. Not a good time. Not a good time for honestly the whole EU, to be honest, man. I wish you guys luck. I wish you guys luck.
And to your point, John, just I mean, just talking about it, just the promise made by Trump, and then the win has other countries considering it. So we've got, I mean, lots of Putin was talking about it last week. This is fantastic. So a Japanese lawmaker, Satoshi, no joke, Satoshi Hamada, an absolute champion. Can't wait to learn more about him. Just came on my radar today, but he is urging Japan to consider an SBR. So he's brought that into the lawmaking bodies in Japan. So yeah, that's fascinating. We had Texas also announce that they have submitted a bill for an SBR as well. So the SBR meme is spreading. We're seeing it being taken up. So it'll be interesting to watch those conversations progress. But John, to your point, if the United States does follow through with the establishment of the BSR, I think we'll see other countries thinking about it now, moving a lot faster, and countries who aren't thinking about it starting to.
Small shout out to the EU, and it's also a news item, so I could just hit it real quick. At least one part of the EU, a small part, the Czech Republic, you guys may have seen this, they came out with legislation that said if you hold Bitcoin for 3 years, there's no capital gains on it. So, there are some bright spots within the EU. And just to contrast that, about a month ago, Italy came out and said they're thinking about legislation it was like a 42% special tax on Bitcoin and digital assets. So different countries are going to have different legislations about this, but I thought the Czech Republic one was at least worth noting.
Absolutely. No, it's a big deal. And something I want to echo on the SBR, I agree wholeheartedly with your point that even if they just hold it, it's a big deal. And people have talked about the game theory on this thing a lot, but I'm actually more bullish what financial companies do in that scenario than other nation states. I think the biggest upside is like if the US does this and say, hey, we're holding this asset or we're buying this asset, Goldman, JP Morgan, like all the money, all the wealth managers, all the private banks, the investment banks, the family offices. It's like this thing is suddenly endorsed as a asset of material importance. And even if they just go from a 0% allocation to a 1% allocation, that's game changing.
Don't you think, Stephen, that those entities already have that signal, have what they need to act?
I don't, honestly. I mean, like, yes, I just think they're, honestly, I'd like to hear John's opinion here. I actually, because he worked at Goldman. My base case and heuristic is that these people are so slow to move, they haven't yet. But how would you answer that question?
There's this guy, either Matthew McDermott or Michael McDermott, and he's the head of the digital assets team at Goldman. And he was doing a CNBC interview, and I just saw the 20-second clip, but he's talking about major multinational companies putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and he said it's conceivable. So now he is the head of digital assets. You have to remember that. He's, a little bit incentivized to talk up this kind of stuff. It would be more impactful if an asset allocator said, that we really think this makes sense. And on that note, I think one of the things we're going to talk about today is the BlackRock explicit recommendation for 2%. Yeah. We didn't even get to that yet. World's largest asset manager is now explicitly saying 2% Bitcoin makes sense. I'm still in the camp that they have enough to consider it. We're past the stage of Bitcoin's going to zero. It's a Ponzi scheme. Don't touch it. I think we're past that, thankfully. But these companies, you have to remember that they are slow to move. They have to go through committees. They have to get buy-in. A lot of these companies have been wildly successful with nothing to do with Bitcoin, right? Like look at the annual return of any of the big tech companies over the last 2 decades. It's phenomenal. It's like 20 to 25% per year. These companies are doing very well for their shareholders. It's a hard sell to tell them, hey, you should also take on a Bitcoin strategy. And the Microsoft news this week is pretty good evidence of that. Less than 1% of the shareholders voted for the Bitcoin strategy. So I think we're moving along, but it's at the stage of, okay, this is serious enough that we'll consider it, but they're still kind of far away from actually getting to the finish line.